worked in human services for nearly a quarter century is going to have a few cases that will always stick with them. For me, Isaac is one of those cases. Isaac's mother threw him away. I'm not talking figuratively. When he was an infant, Isaac was found in a trash can. His mentally ill, substance-addicted mother literally threw him away. Now, Isaac was eventually adopted by a family who loved him. And yet, as he got older and his behaviors became more extreme, they felt they had no option but to send their son halfway across the country to our program that works with kids and families struggling with attachment and trauma. Now, make no mistake, Isaac was a handful. He was bound and determined to push people away before they could throw him away. And yet, underneath was a little boy who more than anything wanted to be seen as a precious gift, not a piece of trash. Over the years, we've worked with a lot of Isaacs, and they have taught us a number of lessons. Lessons that can apply to any child in any situation. Now, these lessons aren't about one style of parenting or another. They're based on decades of research in brain science, which, with apologies to those who've devoted their lives to such research, I will attempt to encapsulate in roughly 160 seconds so we can move on to the lessons. To understand the impact of attachment and trauma, it's important to know that there are three basic parts of the brain. The back brain, or brain stem, which is the fight, flight, freeze part of our brain. The midbrain, or limbic system, which controls our emotions and impulses. And the cortex, or the thinking and reasoning part of our brain. Attachment theory helps us understand what drives behavior in relationships. We know that the limbic and cortex portions of a baby's brain need another brain to develop. And the caregiving that adults provide actually helps shape the child's brain. So, for example, when an adult responds to a baby's cries, known as serve and receive, it impacts social emotional development. Brain development is experience dependent. Every experience you have with your child creates a pathway in the child's brain, like a single strand of yarn going from the child's action to the adult's response. Now, a single strand may not be all that strong, but when a child gets the same response over and over and over again, that pathway becomes stronger and harder to break or change. As a result, the child sees things the way they have seen and experienced them before. When that relationship pathway is positive, it can serve as a buffer against traumatic experiences and fosters the child's ability to experience stress and then return to a calm state. Now, for those of you who are thinking it's all well and good to understand a baby's brain development, but my child is an adolescent, I have good news. The brain has plasticity, which means it can continue to change and develop over time based on experiences. Now, there's one more concept I want to touch on, and that is during a traumatic experience where the child thinks their own or someone else's life is in danger, the autonomic or involuntary nervous system kicks in and signals danger. When that happens, the child moves out of the thinking part of their brain and into the more reactive fight, flight, freeze part of their brain. But trauma doesn't just affect the brain. It's physiological. It affects our breathing, our heart rate, our hearing, all the major systems of the body. That's why trauma is a reactionary sensory experience, because in that moment, the child is not in the thinking part of their brain. So it is in this context, with this very basic understanding of how the brain works, that I would like to offer 3 simple, not easy, but simple lessons that we have learned from applying the brain science to our work with children and their families. Lesson number 1, relationships are primary. Every time you have a positive interaction with your child, it's like making a deposit in a relationship bank, adding another strand to that pathway of experience. Our brains are experience dependent, so you need to make a connection with your child before you attempt correction. You need to make a deposit before you make a withdrawal. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be too soft with your child or you'll never have to correct them, only that you want to build that foundational pathway that's going to shape your child's response before you do. You build that foundation by regularly doing things like looking into their eyes, touching them, noticing something special about them, having fun and laughing with them. All the things you did with your child when they were an infant. Now, it might look a little different as they age. Maybe it's rubbing their back or a high five instead of holding them. Maybe it's a wink and a smile instead of gazing into their eyes. The point is, those core needs don't go away. And when you have tended those needs on a day in, day out basis, when their relationship bank is full, then you can make a withdrawal. You can set limits, say no, correct their behavior when they're acting inappropriately without undermining that core relationship pathway. Relationships are primary. You have to build connection before correction. Lesson number 2, all behavior has meaning. So look for what's going on underneath the behavior. At Chaddock, we look for 4 primary emotions: mad, sad, glad, and scared. For those of you with teenagers, mad or snarky is often a cover for sad or scared. So when your child blows up or has a meltdown over a seemingly little thing, look for what's going on underneath the behavior. We do that with a baby, right? We try to see what's making them cry. We don't just tell them that behavior is unacceptable. We check to see if they're hungry or thirsty or tired or scared. If you want a behavior to stop, you have to respond to the cause, not react to the symptom. Also, too often we expect a cortex response when the child is in back brain, with all the corresponding physiological responses that they may not even be aware of. So when you see your child reacting, try calmly, reflecting back to them what you're seeing. Hey, you don't usually snap at your little sister like that. Did something happen today? Don't ask what they were thinking. They probably weren't. What's wrong with you makes a judgment, keeping the child in back brain and on the defensive. What happened builds connection and seeks to understand. All behavior has meaning. Look for what's going on underneath the behavior. And lesson number 3, how you respond will shape your child's response. So how should you respond? First, when you increase structure, you must increase nurture. Too often we get out of balance one way or the other. And neither extreme, whether you're too strict or cater to your child's every whim, is going to get you the optimum response. Next, consider if you need to reframe your response. For example, when a toddler falls and scrapes her knee, have you ever noticed that she'll often glance to the adult before she responds? Serve and receive. If the adult jumps up with a look of fear on their face, the child may wail in pain. But if instead the adult calmly says, "Oops, pop up," the child might come over for her kiss on her knee and carry on with her playing. Regardless of the age of your child, how you respond will shape their next step. So if you start a conversation with your teenager with "you always" or "you never," do you think it's more likely that they will allow themselves to be vulnerable or get defensive? Serve and receive. Sometimes the best response in a tense situation is to be playful and surprising. When you feel yourself getting defensive, because let's face it, it happens, try diffusing the situation with humor. Do something goofy. Laughter gets everyone, kids as well as adults, out of back brain. That doesn't mean you don't go back to respond to what caused the tense situation in the first place, only that you get everyone into the thinking part of their brain before you do. Relationships are primary, all behavior has meaning, and how you respond will shape your child's response. The research, as well as work with lots of really tough kids like Isaac, have proven the wisdom of these 3 lessons. And I have one more lesson for those of you who are now cataloging every misstep you have ever taken with your child. It's not about perfection. We know that one strand out of place, one withdrawal, will not outweigh an entire bank of positive experiences. Thank you.